Good morning, everybody. All right, I know that I don't really need to be using a microphone in here, but I know we have at least 2 or 3 people who really wanted to be able to join us but couldn't get here physically, so are either tuning in at work or down in the city. So welcome, we're glad that you're able to join us, and welcome to everybody here. I can begin with a personal introduction. So after I graduated from college, I worked for a bank for about 11 months, and halfway I said, this is definitely not what I want to be doing in life. Was teaching religious school and a youth group advisor, and I had been sent to Israel once, and then I was being sent to Israel again, and then I went to this conference for the Union for Reform Judaism, the Reform Movement, and it was a youth movement conference, and I went to this session on opportunities to become a professional youth worker in the Reform movement. And everybody kept saying, I work so hard, but I love my job. I'm thinking, I'm not working that hard and I don't love it. So I applied to work in the youth division of the Union for Reform Judaism in New York City. And so I moved to New York City and worked, it's called I think they're selling the whole thing now, right? I think they are. So 633. That was for a long time the mothership of the Reform movement. In the youth division, I met Anna Kislanski, and Anna was the shlicha for the whole Union for Reform Judaism, right? So a shlicha is an emissary. She can tell you more about this program. And she came to really be an emissary from Israel for the entire Reform movement. There are other shlichim throughout the country at that time. This was, I would say, at the height of the Reform movement, right before the markets crashed in 2007 and began a long period of consolidation. We're going to talk about that more later. So I got to know Anna. We spent some time at Kutz Camp over 2 summers. And personally, my personal introduction to the Israel movement for progressive Judaism, I didn't know what that was. I had grown up in the Reform movement, and all I thought is that people in Israel were Orthodox and more traditional and more authentic than I was. And when I had graduated college and I was working for the movement, I started biking a little bit. And I said to a friend, hey, I need to train for something. I'm just kind of getting bored in the gym. And he said, oh, I'm doing this ride in Israel to raise money for the Reform movement. You should join me. And I did, and it was the hardest bike ride I've ever done, still to this date in my life. We started in Jerusalem, which is a mountain. I went down the mountain, biked all around Tel Aviv and all the way, and then eventually had to come back up the mountain. But the most impactful, thank you, Missy. You're the best, thank you. The most impactful moment was the ride was set up so we went from all of these different Reform communities in Israel from one to another. And all of a sudden I learned that you can be a Reform Jew in Israel, and that's an authentic expression of Judaism. And not only that, but the Israel government is a little unjust to Reform Jews and doesn't they fund all of these Orthodox synagogues, but not Reform synagogues. Since then, and I can tell you the updates on then, because there's been some great Supreme Court cases, and I'll let her tell you about that, and the Iraq and some of the other amazing things that are happening. But it was really eye-opening, and it became, I did this ride 3 more times, a total of 4 times, to help raise money. The ride doesn't exist anymore, but I'm happy if you want to do a biking fundraiser for the Reform movement in Israel to do it. We talked about doing it stateside many times. So I'm going to turn it over now to Anna Kislanski. Anna is now the CEO of the IMPJ, the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism.
So, toda rabba. Thank you for this wonderful introduction, Rabbi Brian. And Boker Tov, it's great to be here this morning. I'm Anna. I'm here with my wonderful colleague, David Bernstein, who's the Deputy Director for Overseas Relations and a long time leader in the movement as well, and hopefully you'll hear from David too. And it's great that you actually started with a personal story, because now I'm going to add a little bit from my own personal biography, which is important in order to understand Reform Judaism in Israel to begin with. As many leaders in the Reform movement, I did not grow up into a Jewish community or into the Reform movement. If I'll ask you here, raise your hand if you grew up within a Jewish community setting, whether it's a synagogue or a school. Okay, so it's most of the people here. This is not the case in Israel. In Israel, the state of Israel, in many ways, says, we'll be your Jewish community. We'll substitute the Jewish community. At least in theory, that could work, but not so much in practice. So anyway, I grew up in a very secular, in Israeli terms, because secular in Israel is not so much secular as maybe outside of Israel, because you still celebrate the holidays and you speak Hebrew and it's Shabbat even if you don't celebrate Shabbat. So that kind of secular. My family, I was not born in Israel. My family made Aliyah from Russia when I was 2 years old. That was in 1974, right after the Yom Kippur War. And for my parents, the only way to express their Jewish identity was actually to move, to be able to leave Soviet Russia and to move to Israel, because they couldn't practice their Judaism. And also, they didn't know how to practice their Judaism. They didn't celebrate the holidays, Shabbat. All they knew is that they were Jewish and they wanted to be part of the Jewish people. So they actually learned from us, from me and my brothers who were already born in Israel, how to celebrate the Chagim, the holidays. So we would come home and say, let's buy sufganiyot for Hanukkah and get a Chanukiah and light Hanukkah candles. My dad, up until this day, and we're already 50 years in Israel, when he reads the Passover Haggadah, it's with this really heavy Russian accent, because that stayed with him. He was 28 then, and he had to learn how to lead a Seder, how to read from the Passover Haggadah. So that's how the atmosphere I grew up in. I thought there were only two ways to express Judaism, to be Jewish, either in Israel, either you're secular, like we were, or you're Orthodox with all halachic Judaism. First time that I ever understood that there was something else was actually when I was facilitating encounters between Nifty youth and Israeli youth. I was then working for an organization called Melitz. It was in my early 20s as a facilitator. And I remember they were supposed to meet for a whole week at the beach at Kibbutz Nachsholim. That's in the center of Israel. And the person who supervised my work said to me, well, we arrived a day earlier before the Americans, and he said, it would be nice if you could meet the American group. They're coming. Have them, as they get off the bus, don't forget to greet the rabbi. So I was waiting, and everyone got off the bus, and I couldn't identify the rabbi. Because in my mind, I was expecting to see an Orthodox rabbi with, long beard and long pants and tzitzit and everything. And eventually there was someone, a young man, introduced himself to me and said, I'm the rabbi. He was wearing Bermuda shorts, sandals, it was summer, it was hot. So, and on that day was also the first time that I ever heard Birkat HaMazon, the blessing that you say after a meal. And for the first time, I heard the kids singing Birkat HaMazon. And it was also the first time for all the Israelis in the room to hear Birkat HaMazon and the singing. Of course, they understood all the words, but they didn't know how to pray. And I said to myself, I want this to be part of my Judaism. I know so much about the Bible. I took a matriculation test because that's what you learn in a public school in Israel. You learn all the stories about the Bible, but you don't learn how to pray. So that's one thing. But I still didn't know Reform Judaism in Israel existed. I thought it was only in North America. About a year later, my husband Arthur and I, then it was my boyfriend, we decided to get married. And we already knew that we didn't want to get married through the Orthodox rabbinate, but we didn't know who could marry us. And then out of all people, the DJ that we hired to do our wedding said, why don't you go and meet with Rabbi Meir Azari? He's a young rabbi in Tel Aviv, is a Reform rabbi. And I said, wow, there are Reform rabbis in Israel? I didn't know that. So we went to meet with Meir. We decided that he's going to perform our wedding. We immediately clicked. And Meir said to us, you know, we're going to perform I'm going to perform your wedding, your chuppah on the shore of Caesarea, but you need to know that it won't be recognized by the state of Israel. So you guys have to go to Cyprus and get married there, or any other state that conducts civil weddings. So we went to Cyprus. It was a nice holiday. We were registered. There was this nice mayor who spoke to us in Greek in one of the towns in Cyprus. And I came back with a certificate. I brought the certificate to the Ministry of Interior Affairs, and that's how they recognized us as a married couple. They didn't recognize the Jewish chuppah. They recognized the civil wedding. And this is the case up until this day. I mean, even today, that was back in 1996. Even today, non-Orthodox weddings are not recognized by the state of Israel, and there are no civil marriage in Israel. The one thing that is actually nice is that, I don't know if you know the term Utah weddings. In Utah, you can be married online. So there were several couples lately in Israel that were married on Zoom, and that was recognized by the state of Israel. So now you even don't have to travel outside of Israel, or you can just, you know, use a certificate that we're providing and be registered with a lawyer. But this is the case. This is the case up until now. Several years later, I went on shlichut to the Union for Reform Judaism. I was already a member and working actually for one of our congregations in Haifa, Congregation Or Chadash. And then I realized that the Reform movement in North America is so huge. In Israel, at that time, we had 25 Reform congregations, not so much. And here, there were about 850 congregations. And the summer camps and the music and everything was celebrated in such an amazing manner. I always say that when we went to the shlichut, and we lived in Brooklyn, we were there for 4 years together with my 2 daughters, and my son was born there. When we returned to Israel 4 years later, my whole family, when we came on shlichut, I identified as Reform, where my husband and my daughters, they just came along. After this experience of 4 years, all of us identified as Reform. So this encounter of Israeli Jews with Jews outside of Israel is doing something. So when you now speak to leaders in our movement, Israeli rabbis, sometimes lay leaders, you can hear their stories. Some of them will say, I'm a member of a Reform community because as an Israeli, I lived outside of Israel and I joined a Jewish community outside of Israel. So that affected us as well. I came back and I started working for the Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism as director of congregations. At that time, the executive director of the Israeli Reform Movement was Rabbi Gilad Kariv. He's now a member of the Knesset. And Gilad gave me a task and he said, you know, we're only 25 Reform congregation. My dream is to double the amount of Reform congregations in Israel. Our vision, it was the vision of Gilad and our board. We said to ourselves that if we want to touch the Israeli society and we want to have an impact in Israeli society, we have to double in size. And I said, how do you do that? And he said, you just don't say no. If anyone wants to start a congregation somewhere, you just say, yeah, we'll come up with the resources. And the resources are important because in here, the system is completely different. You understand that you need your Jewish community, and in order to have your Jewish community, you need to invest in it. In Israel, you remember what I said in the beginning, the state said, oh, we'll take care of your religious services and all that you need, so you don't need to pay for it, or you're actually paying for it through your taxes in Israel. But the only religious services that the state is providing is Orthodox. So if you want to start something else, and the mindset of the Israelis is that someone else should pay for it, then we, the Israeli Reform Movement, have to come up with the funds in order to start these congregations. And along the years, eventually, our hope is that congregations will be able to be self-sustained, but still we're supporting that. And that's how we need to come up with the resources in order to start new congregations. And we did that. Within a decade, we were able to establish 27 new congregations throughout Israel. The other thing, not only we didn't say no, we had wonderful leaders to start these congregations. We had rabbis who are graduates of HUC, of the Israeli Rabbinic Program in Jerusalem. Now we have about 129 Israeli ordained Reform rabbis, all of them in Israel. And I think that about 60% of them are serving our 54 Israeli congregations. So we have a youth movement, we have a pre-army program for young people that volunteer before they defer their army service for a year and they volunteer and get leadership skills. And we have all other programs that I might speak to you a little later about, but I want to take us to the here and now and actually to October 7th. And when we were in a place where our movement joined on October 6th, I would say, a day before, the mindset was completely different. Our movement have joined the pro-democracy protest. Have you heard about the pro-democracy protest in Israel? Right before the war, there were changes that the Israeli government tried to make to the legal system, and to make the Supreme Court weaker in a way, or to be stronger than the Supreme Court. And we as a movement understood that this can be crucial to our own survival. One of the things when we're so discriminated, the one thing that is really protecting us is the Supreme Court. We have a public and legal arm called IRAC, the Israel Religious Action Center. Like the RAC here in the United States, we have the Israel Religious Action Center, which is part of our movement. Many of our achievements in Israel in overcoming obstacles and discrimination were thanks to the winnings of IRAC for us at the Supreme Court. For instance, out of our 27 new congregations, we have 13 congregations that are in rural areas. Those rural areas in Israel are being served by regional municipalities. Those municipalities serve mostly the periphery and the kibbutzim. And apparently, in 2012, we won a historic court case, which is called Miri Gold court case. And that was after a battle of 7 years, where the mayor of the regional municipality of Gezer, this is where David's congregation is from, said, you know, we have 17 Orthodox rabbis in the region, and only one non-Orthodox rabbi. That's Rabbi Miri Gold. All of the other Orthodox rabbis, their salaries is being paid by the municipality who's getting the funds from the state. I want to pay for Rabbi Miri Gold, and I can't, even though she's providing religious services to the people who live in the regional municipality of Gezer. So together with the mayor of Gezer, and the congregation and Iraq and the movement, we went to court. We took the state to court, and we were fighting for 7 years, and finally we won. And after we won in 2012, the state had to pay for the majority of Rabbi Miri Gold's salary, and that was a precedent for us. Once that happened, we understood that we can establish more congregations in other regional municipalities across Israel, and actually spread to the periphery, which is very important, and it relates to October 7th, because we established 13 more congregations in regional municipalities in Israel, in the Upper Galilee, in the Western Galilee, in Be'er Sheva in the south, and in other places in the south. One of these congregations was the congregation that we established in the Gaza envelope, and that congregation is called Sha'ar HaNegev. That congregation served about 10 kibbutzim. The names of the kibbutzim that you hear on the news, Kfar Aza and Mefalsim and Nachal Oz and Or HaNer and other kibbutzim, are the kibbutzim that we served as a regional congregation. The name of the rabbi serving currently in this congregation is Rabbi Yael Vorgan. She's a hero because now that her congregation is spread out around the country, her office is in her car. So she's driving all over Israel in order to provide comfort and religious services, whether it's a bar bat mitzvah ceremony or a funeral or a bereavement circle, just to be there with her congregants. Every Friday night, every Friday night, she conducts Kabbalat Shabbat in a different location in Israel. It could be a hotel in Mitzpe Ramon, where the people were evacuated to, or it could be another kibbutz, like Kibbutz Shfaim, where the people from Kibbutz Kfar Aza in the regional municipality were evacuated to. The mayor, the late mayor of the regional municipality of Sha'ar HaNegev, Ophir Lipstein, was a great friend of us. He was murdered the first few hours of the terror attack, and we miss him dearly. We actually held a special Torah service ceremony. We received a Torah from the World Union for Progressive Judaism, and that Torah was named after Ophir Lipstein. We held that ceremony in Kibbutz Shfaim, because the members of Ophir's kibbutz, Kfar Aza, are still living on Kibbutz Shfaim. To see Ophir's 90-year-old mother holding the Torah, not wanting to let it go, as a memory for fear. And that was the first time that she, a woman, was holding a Torah. That was really moving for us. And Ophir, right before the war broke, met with me, met with Rabbi Yael Vorgan, and said, I want to give you a land allocation to build a congregation in the Gaza envelope, in Sha'ar HaNegev, in the area. Because one other thing that you should know, most of our congregations don't own their own buildings. I'm also a member of a congregation in Even Yehuda. Even Yehuda is a town in the center of Israel. We don't have a sanctuary, so we rent space from the local museum. Every time that it's time to hold services, you know, we move the exhibits and we make the place a sanctuary. And in Israel, in order to build a synagogue, you have to get a land from the local municipality and then start a building, and that's also not so easy. We have congregations that had to take, again with the help of Iraq, had to take the state to court, the local municipality to court, in order to get land. So just one example, more than one, explaining how the Supreme Court was important for us and how that's why we as a movement decided to join the pro-democracy movement and demonstrated every Motzei Shabbat to protect the Supreme Court. And it actually affected the public sphere because for the first time, because religion and state right before October 7th became such a big issue in Israel, we were approached by 16 municipalities in Israel asking our movement and our local congregations to hold egalitarian Simchat Torah celebrations in, I'm not home, by the way, it's okay. Egalitarian Simchat Torah celebrations in the public sphere. We, of course, hold them in our synagogues, but also in Israel, there's a custom that on Motzei Simchat Torah, when the holiday ends, you actually are able to take the Torah out and just dance with it in the streets. But mostly, it's these celebrations are ran by Orthodox organizations. And for the first time, the municipality said, well, we want to have egalitarian circles. We want to enable women to dance with the Torah too. So we were very optimistic Friday night when we went to bed, and then waking up Saturday morning understanding that everything has changed. We're not going to celebrate Simchat Torah. The whole notion, the whole state, and our movement is going to go through a big disaster. And I gave you an example of what happened with our congregation in Sha'ar HaNegev. We have two other congregations in the periphery in the north. One is in the Western Galilee, very close to the Lebanese border, and the other one is in Kiryat Shmona. Those two congregations are very young. The congregation in Kiryat Shmona is only 3 years old. The congregation in the Western Galilee, in the regional municipality of Mate Asher, is 5 years old. And the people there had to be evacuated. The rabbis were also evacuated from their home. Our rabbi in the Western Galilee, she had to move about 5 times. She still doesn't have a permanent home, while still having to comfort her congregants and having to provide spiritual guidance and provide solace and comfort to the people. There's still about 150,000 people in Israel that are displaced. Some of them have moved, can't go back to their towns and kibbutzim, and they've moved somewhere else there's a whole kibbutz now in the Kiryat Yovel neighborhood in Jerusalem. There's a school within a school. You know, we have our movement has 4 schools in Israel. It's part of the public education system, but they have rabbis, and one of those schools is the school in the Tali school in Jerusalem. I went to visit there. I had a meeting with the director, and she said, "Why don't you meet the director of the school from Sderot that we're now hosting?" Because they had room, so they're also incubating another school from Sderot, because that school, those people decided not to come back and rent spaces they got some funding from the government and rent spaces in there. In the beginning, I mentioned the government, it took the government about a month and a half until they were able to respond to the disaster. So the civil society, and our movement included, had to step up and do something. So we have a humanitarian aid fund. It's called Keren Bechavod. It's usually designed to help with the poor, the needy, empower women in distress, make sure that poor people are getting material assistance, especially before the holidays. But in times of war, Keren Bechavod, the director of Keren Bechavod, already knows that fund, that she needs to act. And so she did. And we actually started a center in Eilat. Eilat is the most southern town in Israel. There were 50,000 people who were evacuated to different hotels in Eilat. And in the beginning, there were no schools for the people who were evacuated. So we actually recruited volunteers to the center that were able to conduct informal activities to the kids in Eilat. Some of those volunteers were actually young people who survived the Nova massacre. They just felt that they needed to do something, and they found themselves in Eilat. So some of them were, after going through an evaluation, were actually they were volunteering for us. About a month later, when the state started to function and establish schools in Eilat, they hired our volunteers as workers and offered them jobs to continue working with the people who were evacuated. We didn't know that this is going to last for such a long time. Sometimes it seems to me like a very, very long day that's not ending. And sometimes I'm saying to myself, wow, this is our routine. This is our emergency routine. So what do we do in our emergency routine? Every Motzei Shabbat, every Saturday night, we go to Hostage Square and we hold a Havdalah ceremony. We're working very hard for the release of the hostages. We have families of people being held hostage that are members in our congregations. So there are certain names that resonate to us. For instance, the name Keith Siegel. Keith Siegel is being held hostage while his wife Aviva was already released, and his brother Lee is a leader in our movement, advocating for the release of the hostages. A cousin of our executive director in Congregation Kol HaNeshama, Karina Arayev, is a soldier. She was in the army base of Nachal Oz when she was abducted. Those were the women soldiers, the young girls that were, watching on cameras how the Hamas invaded their army base. So this is very personal for us, like it is personal for so many people in Israel. So every Saturday night we hold Havdalah on Hostage Square. There are usually about 20 to 30 people who are part of the reform movement who join, and hundreds of people who are just on Hostage Square and are joining us as well because they feel that they need prayer and they need comfort. So we call it the synagogue of the street. It's taking the prayer to the public sphere, because this is something that is so needed in Israel. I'm going to stop for a minute. Maybe David, you want to add something, or maybe people have questions. Yeah. So if you have questions, I'm happy to answer more. I would love it to be more of a dialogue than just me talking. Thank you for asking. Hostage, yeah, thank you. The question I was asked, where is Hostage Square? Hostage Square is in the center of Tel Aviv. That's the square in front of the Tel Aviv Museum. That's where the headquarters of the families who their relatives were abducted decided to stay. When you go to Hostage Square, you find a lot of tents from the various kibbutzim that people were abducted from. There's a large art exhibit where you have this very, very long table with empty chairs and empty plates and empty seats, because they're saying this is the Shabbat table of the hostages. And there are different exhibitions that are changing there, and people just want to express their own grief. Just Israeli people, it's always packed with people, whether it's families of the people who are held hostage, or whether it's just people who want to come and identify. Every Saturday night, after the Havdalah that we're holding, there's a rally that the headquarters of the families of the people who were abducted are holding, and thousands of people are joining the rally and calling for the release of the hostages.
We've been waiting for that question. I'll start, but then look. The question was, is the reform movement political, and has the reform movement taken a stand on, like, the war or the goals of the war, or something, the Israel reform movement? And the answer is, we're political, but we're not partisan political. So right now, our board is debating. First of all, we've taken a stand on the release of the hostages and the importance of making that the highest priority in the war, and that's why we do what Anna described earlier about being involved with the Hostage Forum, which is a voluntary organization supporting the release of the hostages, doing the Havdalah, the ceremony at Hostage Square, and also Kabbalot Shabbat. On the issue of the war itself, and I'll go right into it, calling for humanitarian assistance by Israel to be increased, our board literally tomorrow, no, a week from tomorrow, this coming Friday, 3 days from now, is debating putting out a statement in support of way more humanitarian assistance, even though Israel is providing and allowing a lot of humanitarian assistance to Gaza, for the people in Gaza, and we're debating that. Early in the war, we put out a statement that Anna can afterwards expand on, that one of the initial responses to the war, and I think you can imagine it, what happens, all of a sudden when the war began, there was a distrust between Jewish Israelis and about the Arab Israeli citizens of Israel. And even examples of incitement and discrimination by Israelis against Israeli Arabs, we right away put out a statement against that, calling for understanding. The Israeli Arabs were just as horrified by the atrocities of the Hamas as everyone else. Maybe there's here and there's exceptions, but in every society there's exceptions. And we put out a statement calling for shared society, and much of our programmatic efforts, and Anna will expand, have gone into that issue. On the issue of calling for a ceasefire, our board is also going to discuss that. I'm not sure which way it will go, and it's a complicated issue for Israelis. I'll say something honest here, that even Israelis who are, and very much to the left, when you have children either in reserve duty or fighting in Gaza, it's very hard to find the room in your whatever heart and soul, as much as you care about the suffering of civilians in Gaza. It's very hard to detach from the fact that your children are fighting, that friends of yours are held captive by the Hamas, that people were killed on the first day of the war and during the war, children of our members and of friends. I had a funeral on my moshav where I live of someone killed a soldier fighting in the war. So it's hard to find room for that, but we're debating that in our movement, just as it's being debated here. There's no question that we want the war to end and there to be peace. I'll let, if you want to add something.
Yeah, just one thing about the political. Another thing that we're debating about is whether we should call for elections. There was no doubt in our minds when we took the streets for the protest, for the pro-democracy protest. But here, during a war, stating that we want to replace this government, no matter what our own personal feelings are, it's a bold statement. And we're about to decide whether to make that statement or not. We are a democratic movement. So there's a lot of drama happening within our leadership this week while David and I are in Chicago. So actually, I would need to, midnight, Thursday night, I'm going to be awake and on the Zoom with our board in Israel. So thank you for that question.
The bottom line is we take political stands, but we don't take, I'm sorry. The bottom line is we take political stands often, but we're not partisan. We don't say one party or another. But on the war, what Anna said at the end about calling for elections, there's a growing movement in Israel, and many of our membership protest in that movement. Our question is whether we'll put up a sign supporting it with our movement's logo. Not sure yet.
So I think kind of a good dovetail on that question of outside of trauma and conflict for a moment, the Israel Religious Action Center, and correct me if I'm wrong, has advocated for non-Jewish Israelis in the past. And that's always been something I've been very proud of, that it's a beacon of justice, not just for Jewish issues that affect us directly, but for people who are non-Jewish who are facing discrimination. They know in Israel, and it's known, that they can approach the Iraq to defend them.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that, and that relates to what David mentioned before about Jews and Arabs in Israel. We have the Israel Religious Action Center, which is part of our movement, has a department to combat racism. So anyone who encounters racism and it's mostly not just Arabs, but it's mostly Arabs are approaching that center, and we sometimes again have to take certain cases to court in order to make sure that there's no discrimination about it. one thing that I'm very proud of is that together, IMPJ, the Israeli Reform Movement, and Iraq, we just held a conference to promote shared society about 3 weeks ago. That was on right before Purim, on the day of the fast of Esther, which is also the fast of Ramadan. So we held this gathering together, provided tools and inspiration to our congregations and to others, promoting shared society activities. And we had Druze people and Baha'i and Muslims and Christians all came together. And towards the end of the day, we all broke fast together because Jews were fasting that day and Muslims were fasting that day. And it was beautiful. We held an interfaith service. And right now, Ramadan is just about to end, is a very tense time in Israel. At that same month, there were certain terror attacks of very extreme Palestinians towards Jews in Israel. And still, we said, even if it's happening, that's not everyone. That's a very small number of extreme people. So in spite of that, we should actually promote shared society activities. And we have a program called Neighbors that people, families in our congregations are having a long-term dialogue with Arabs in towns that are next to the congregation, or if it's a mixed city within the city. And this is something that is very, very important for us, and it will continue to be important for us as a religious organization. I think it's very important to promote for tolerance. Do you have more questions? I think.
So I'm just going to repeat the question. The question was, what about looking, God willing, after the war, the day after with?
Right. So, I remember. I remember the question. So first of all, about the day after. At the beginning, I was using the term the day after, but as the war continues, looking for it to end in order to do something is not realistic anymore. I think that the day after is now, even though the war is still going on. So, for instance, promoting shared society, or another plan that we have for the day after, but actually today, is also strengthening the relationship between Israeli Jews, the reform movement that identify with the reform movement in Israel, and congregations and Jews in the diaspora. We cannot wait for the day after. With regards to the two-state solution, again, this is me. I think that it's going to be on the table again to be discussed by our movement. It was on the table in, I don't know, several years ago, and our board decided, since we're nonpartisan and since we have many voices within our movement, our board decided that we're going to concentrate on what's happening in Israel. So if we're promoting shared society between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews. But it is, I think that the idea, or talking about a two-state solution, is now becoming, it's on the table again. And I think that our movement, I think in several months from now, will be asking itself whether it's time to take a stance on it, or at least bring it back to the discussion. We have many voices within our movement. Some of our leaders are members of Rabbis for Human Rights. Of course, they are for a two-state solution. Others are saying, this is a hot potato, don't touch it. And others are saying, no way, we're voting for the right wing. I don't think we have many supporters in our movement for Bibi Netanyahu, but there are people there's a variety of voices within our movement, whether it's right wing, left wing.
Could you just talk for a minute along the political nature? You've mentioned Gilad Kariv several times. Gilad Kariv didn't retire. He's now a member of Knesset. So could you just talk about his career for a moment? And
first of all, I want to say that Gilad is a bold leader. He's been a mentor for us on many ways. I think that even within the Knesset, he's promoting our values. Many times you can see him stand on the podium and holding our Reform Movement Siddur, reading a prayer for the Reform Movement Siddur. Doesn't care if the Haredim in the room, if the Haredi members of Knesset in the room are screaming at him, comparing him to a pig, really calling him names. It's whatever. He's very, very brave and resilient. Is a great partner of ours. Every time there's a group, solidarity group that is coming, or just a congregational group, Gilad would try to do whatever he can in order to host them in the Knesset and speak to them, and is an amazing leader in the Avodah Party. We're not asking. There are some people in our movement who are members of the Avodah Party and vote for the Avodah Party, and some are not. But we're all very, very proud of Gilad.
I want to add something, and it's maybe a little bit in answer somewhat to the question you asked previously about two-state solution. Gilad is one of the leaders in Israel in the parliament who's come out clearly saying that it's not enough to win the war, that we have to have a political solution, and that the war has only enhanced that need. And he's come out firmly and clearly for the two-state solution in some format or other. But at the same time, and this is also important, if he was sitting here answering your question, he would say, let's not be naive. There's Iran that wants to obliterate Israel from the map and is using the proxies in Lebanon, the Hezbollah, and also the Hamas were their proxies to start what they started. And that the situation geopolitically for Israel has become way more dangerous, yet at the same time, we need to find the wherewithal to strive for a political solution. Gilad is leading, together with some other people, a movement to attempt to sort of coalesce together what you would call the Zionist left of Israel. And when there will be elections, to bring that to bear in the elections. And in terms of the values, he, as Anna said, he expresses our values, and on a personal level, he's like, for both of us, for me, I consider him one of my closest friends. Besides everything else, he's the most incredible mensch. And the other thing, Brian, he won, you know how, I bet they do this in Congress too, they rate the activity of the different Congress people according to how often and how many laws and how involved in are. Gilad came in the top three years in a row in terms of just being a functioning, incredible Knesset member.
I think there's so the question was, what is the vision of winning the war? I think there are different ways to answer your question. If I were the Prime Minister of Israel right now, or if I were a representative like the spokesperson of the IDF, I would say, destroy the Hamas, make sure they're not able to go back in power, and release of all the hostages. And if that happens, then we win the war. I think that the approach to answer that is so different. I think that, first of all, for me, winning the war is the release of all the hostages. That's the most important thing. And maybe, I don't know if everything can be achieved all at once. And it's very, very difficult. If you also ask the families of the hostages, they would say the same thing. And whether you need to achieve that through ceasefire, then let it be a ceasefire. On the other hand, release of the hostages is one thing. We have people who are displaced from their homes, both from the south and the north. The people in the north can't go back. They just can't, because there are rockets being fired every day from Lebanon. So how can you say we're winning the war if you can't go back to your home? How do you measure the end of Hamas? I don't know whether if they'll stop, shooting rockets at us, if they won't be able to form a government again. Are they going to all be in exile somewhere in Dubai or in the Qatar outside of Israel? I mean, there's a very, very difficult, it's very, very difficult to answer that. We know that even when the war started, we knew that there was no one simple solution. But I think that the rhetoric of nitzachon muchlat, a total victory, is somewhat naive. It's something that politicians in Israel win. And I think that even if you ask what does total victory means, it would mean different things to different people in Israel.
So we'll read that prayer in 1 second. I think just because we have to wrap up, and of course this is a days, weeks-long conversation, and we're so grateful that you're here and willing to be so honest and have some of this humility to hold that honesty, which is not hard for us. I think for me personally, especially in this particular war, there is no winning. Like, I don't think this is, nobody will, there is no victory in the war. There is only ending the war and returning to the veneer of peace that we have sometimes enjoyed. And I think, over the last 6 months, my enduring sermon has been that we both have, holding our particularism and praying for the hostages and the safety of Israel, and going back to this idea that we have this, as Jews and as American Jews, we have an existential connection to our homeland, and we can't even choose to sever that connection if we want to, that it's always there. And that, from the very moment human beings are created, God said all human beings are created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. And for me, one of I gave this sermon a few weeks ago, that even in the spirit of the IDF, the Ruach Tzahal, it says, as a soldier, you have to see the humanity in the person who you are fighting against. And I can only speak to myself, but I feel like it's this uniquely Jewish burden that we are called to both hold ourselves and others at the same time, and it's an impossible burden. And I think one of the reasons why I love the IMPJ is because a lot of organizations in October, November, December statements, not statements, took heat for putting out statements and not putting out statements, and the right statement and the wrong statement. But IMPJ is actually doing the work. And I think every single time the Iraq defends and promotes better equality for women, better rights for LGBTQ people, or fights for somebody who's being discriminated against in a Bedouin camp that's going to be bulldozed, or an Israeli Arab Muslim woman who's being discriminated against, that helps show that we can actually have a future and live together. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud of our reform movement in general, but especially the work that you all are doing in Israel, because it's, which is why I say, we can pass laws to get rid of anti-Semitism in the United States, but that doesn't actually get rid of anti-Semitism. But when we show up with with a Jewish star saying, I'm a Jew and I'm going to go volunteer, people say, oh, interesting. Jews might not all be bad. The hope. So I just kind of want to wrap up there. We can keep talking about a lot of these things for a long time. I'm going to promote, just because I think it's really important. Anna and David brought some sign-up sheets if you want to get on the IMPJ's mailing list to learn about things that are happening in Israel, in the United States, that we could live stream as well. And of course, being here, as they said in the beginning, the government does not fund the reform movement like it does the Orthodox movement, and that makes it very difficult sometimes for Israelis who want to participate, who say, wait, but I can just go for free over there. And so there's a little bit of reliance upon the American Reformed Jewish community to help fund it. It's grown, in 20 years, it's grown leaps and bounds in terms of being much more funded by Israelis, but still needing our hope. So if you're feeling so moved and inclined to do so, I hope that you'll consider that as well.
So thank you. So the sign-up sheet is here. Should we pass it around, or what would be easier? Because it's not a.
You can pass it around.
And
There's a pen.
and I have a pen. So in ending this, first of all, thank you for being here and listening. And one of the things we also realize is how hard the war impacts our brothers and sisters and friends here in this room, and all over Chicago and all over the United States. And the one thing, and I agree with Brian's conclusion, Rabbi Brian's conclusion totally, but so I'm going to share with you since the war began, a lot of our rabbis and lay leaders and others, evacuees, have written original prayers for various things that have to do with what's gone on. We sent them out to rabbis, but they sometimes get lost, and we'll send them to Rabbi Brian again so we can share it with you. We'll also be sending later this week and also next week special prayers and readings that have to do with the war for the Passover, the Seder, that express the values that Anna talked about and that Rabbi Brian alluded to so eloquently just now. But I want to try, with putting on my glasses, to read one example. It's a prayer for the return of the hostages, written by one of our rabbis. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Avram and Sarah, Isaac and Rivka, Yaakov, Leah, and Rachel, bless the captured, the kidnapped, and the missing, men, women, and young children, and all those held in painful captivity and danger. May it be your will, Shekhinah, source of life, to rescue them, to redeem their souls, and return them swiftly to their homes. May the words of the prophet come true as it is written. Thus said God, a cry is heard in Ramah, wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children who are gone. Thus said God, restrain your voice from weeping, your eyes from shedding tears, for there is a reward for your labor, declares God. They shall return from the enemy's land. Amen. And I could go on reading prayers for the Israeli soldiers and for peace that all of us want and pray for.
Just to say thank you so much for joining us.
And if anyone wants to sign.
Thank you.